probably agree on.
Yeah, the playoff team for sure.
So do you.
I mean, I tell you what, I don't think there was a more accurate state. And
if they struggle again, I mean, I don't think there's any way you can keep Alex Critch, but.
What's going on, y'all? Bud Elliott here, back again for another episode of Summer School. That's our college ball preview series here on the Cover 3 podcast. That guy you're looking at, that's Stephen Brooks of Spartan Tailgate. And that means we're talking Michigan State today. Stephen, welcome back to the show, dude.
Hey, man. Happy to be back, bud. It's always a good time of year to see your face on the screen and start talking a little ball. And, you know, I'd be happy to just talk about the new college football game like we were off air, but let's get to what the people really want to hear about, I guess, and we'll talk some Michigan State.
Michigan State gave me all I could handle when I was playing as Utah, I will say. So Spartan fans may be pretty happy with how they're portrayed in that game. Stephen, by the way, if you guys don't know, is one of the best analysts that we have in terms of accuracy on the team he covers. Not that I'm going to publish these ranks, but I kind of keep little notes. I'm like, okay, Brooks is on this thing, man. In fact, the entire state of Michigan, because Sam Webb has been spot on too on the Wolverines. Although I'm sure the Red Cedar message board will strongly disagree, as will the other direction. You guys got a special chemistry there, man. It's a cool site you're around.
Yeah, hey, appreciate it. Thank you for that. It's been fun to do these, and I think that the summer school series has been super informative. I enjoy it as somebody who's always looking ahead to the season and just what's up with Iowa. This year they haven't been on the schedule for a couple of years or whatever it might be. I mean, these things are awesome. I think you and the rest of our network do a great job with them. So I'm always happy to do it and be a part of it. I know it's going to be a fun conversation. I know it's going to be a smart conversation when I hop on here. So it's one of these things I look forward to. I don't always look forward to all these type of things. I'll be honest.
I appreciate that. So a lot of new things going on at Michigan State. Last year was kind of insane with the whole Mel Tucker. Do we go fire resignation? Whatever that was. However they termed it, but he was out. Like that was really, really an awkward season that the Spartans had. And I thought they made a really inspired hire in Jonathan Smith, who I was one of the high ratings on when we did our coaching rankings on the Cover 3 podcast. And what do you expect this to look like long term, but also short term for this year?
Short term, I think they're going to take some lumps this year. I mean, especially when you look at that middle section of that schedule. I think there's going to be some ugly Saturdays or Fridays. When they have I don't even know if I have the order.
This is insane. They have short rest, or you have to go to Oregon on a Friday after playing Ohio State the last Saturday.
Right, Ohio State, Oregon, Iowa, Michigan, 4 games in a 5-week stretch. Good luck to you there. But the top third and the last third are much more manageable. But you just wonder, where will they be at for that last third? The last 3 to 4 games. Mentally, physically, where will they be at after that middle chunk? That's going to be just a gauntlet. Early on, I think they'll pick up a couple wins. I think they'll get their feet underneath them. But I just, you see some Vegas lines, 4.5, 5.5. Man, I kind of lean under on those just because, when you look at the scales of all the portal activity and how everything's gone since December, I don't think that they're on the right side necessarily talent-wise. Now, yes, you do have Aiden Childs as a very promising quarterback. Jack Velling, a tight end, came over from Oregon State. So there's some interesting guys for sure, but you lost 2 D tackles who are starters for you, who are going to be, bridge players from the last staff to this staff, probably NFL guys, maybe all Big Ten type of guys, and then a starting safety in Jaden Mangum, who was somewhat, sort of in that conversation, definitely a starter, maybe an all Big Ten guy, probably a year away from an NFL guy. But between those 3, I don't think they brought in necessarily anybody, at least defensively, of that caliber. So on the aggregate, they may be a little less talented than they were, but also maybe a little deeper, especially in certain situations. So I think they're going to be a little bit of a slow start out of the gate. If they can do something interesting, knock somebody off, or at least give somebody a run for their money, that's going to be worthwhile. But long term, to your question, he wants it to look like it was at Oregon State. He wants it to be guys who are in the program 3, 4, and 5 years that you're like not super excited about maybe on signing day, and then boom, they're draft picks 4 or 5 years later. We're going to see if that's possible, though, right? I mean, as you and I and everybody watching knows, it's what he took over the environment of 2018 at Oregon State year 1 versus year 1 at Michigan State in 2024 is way different. And frankly, I don't know if his strategy can work in this era. Can you hold on to a fledgling 3-star guy long enough to develop him, to turn him into that pro as a 5th-year senior, or at least do that enough? So that's what he's going to try to do. And you can see how it did work, but I just also wonder if that's even a feasible, approach in the way the sport's operating now in 2024.
I think that's a great question. I do think that, Michigan State, they definitely have, their NIL is not terrible. Clearly, they made good offers to, at least from what has been reported, to both the guys that left there on the defensive interior. And I wonder, if you're in this level of rebuild, is there a certain aspect of financial prudence where you're like, okay, we need to kind of keep our powder dry for spending when we actually have a real window to win? And with all due respect to Michigan State, the team this year, I don't, as you just said, they're probably not in a real window to win in year one of a rebuild when the coach got fired, early in the season last year. But I do think that there's a difference between like a Wake Forest where they used to do that and they would get old, stay old. Where now it's really hard to keep your guys. But if you have legit Big Ten money, especially after the House decision, and you can get your boosters behind, we want to keep our guys who do actually want to be here, but also we need to make it right financially for them to be here. I think that can work. Maybe not at quite like an Ohio State level, clearly, but I think there's something to be said for using NIL for retention and not just going out and buying a new team every year, so to speak. Defensively, what are they trying to run on defense?
So they brought Joe Rossi over from Minnesota, who was quietly one of the better coordinators in the league. Maybe not that quiet, but at least when they came over here in 2012, really beat Michigan. Or I'm sorry, 2022, and beat Michigan State up. I was like, that's when he kind of caught my eye. I was like, man. And of course, they had the 21 team with Winfield and a couple pros, and then they had a really good season that year. So he had quietly been one of the better coordinators in the league. It'll be a 4-down deal with, a lot, for at least from what we saw in the spring game, a lot of cover 3 and cover 1 behind it. But I think that was, a little bit of keeping things in the bag too. I think they'll be much more varied probably on the back end than they were, especially under the previous staff. It was pretty rigid in their coverage preferences under Scotty Hazelton before. So the big tweak that they're introducing here is they're going to have a stand-up end playing out of a 2-point. They just call it a rush end. They don't call it a monster or a ghoul or anything crazy. Yeah, it's just a rush end. Yeah, it's just a rush end. And that's a position that's interesting to me because it's such a unique skill set that ideally, Boye Mafe played there for him at Minnesota. It was a 2nd-round pick, and as I was doing this thing in the NFL, and it's such a unique spot where you want this guy that's 6'4", 245, but he has to be your best pass rusher. He has to be able to cover a back out of the backfield. He has to be able to set the edge. He's got to be like a unicorn freak of your defense. And when you have that guy, man, you can do so much with him, but it's really hard to find that guy. And I don't think they have him on this roster yet. So they're going to have to work with what they have from the 4-3 traditional sort of ends that they inherited. I'll be curious to watch that position moving forward, but that's really what he's about. They'll play a lot of nickel is what I'm expecting. They will play some true 4-3, but a lot of nickel, and I think they're going to play a lot of different stuff behind it. So that's kind of what you're looking at there. And up front, they're going to be more of an attacking one gap, front, as opposed to reading 2 gaps, and setting up plays for the linebackers. I think you're going to see D linemen more upfield, getting upfield more aggressively and just playing that sort of style up front.
So where, if anywhere, is this team a lot better than it was last year?
Quarterback. For sure. Unless you were talking about strictly defense, but definitely quarterback.
No, both sides good.
Yeah. Childs is just super talented. the nerds like us, we're up late watching him, and especially I come home from a game in Bloomington or whatever, at 11:30 at night, and it's Oregon State's just kicking off at Stanford. Let's go, baby. That's exactly what I need right now. So I'm, very, very talented kid. I think we all need to remember he is just a sophomore and he is just a first-time starter because the height, he has arrived as this savior type of figure And everybody has given him plenty of praise this offseason. I think we all have to remember that. But you watch him, and man, the talent is there. He is very, very gifted. There's a lot to like about his game. And hand in hand with that, though, I just don't know what to think about his supporting cast quite yet. They don't really have at least as far as we can tell on the outside, they don't have like a true number one receiver. He has Jack Velling. I mentioned the tight end that he's comfortable with. Offensive line has to replace a lot of experience up front with guys who haven't played as much football. That's going to be a major question mark. Running back Nate Carter, I think, is a stud. He's in that maybe second tier of the Big Ten, I guess you could say, but he's a good player. So he'll be all right there. But the rest of his supporting cast, I don't know too much about. Corner, they maybe upgraded. They brought in a lot of guys like Ed Woods from Arizona State and Hughes from LSU. I'm always a little leery because I've seen some SEC corners and some other, some guys come up here and flame out, So that's a position that I'm always hesitant to sort of crown anybody at before I see them. But those would be two. At linebacker, they added some depth. I think they're already decent there, though. But probably quarterback and corner are probably the most two, at least with the potential to make the biggest jump.
Who's a guy who, aside from Childs, I think that one is pretty obvious. Who's a guy who, let's fast forward to mid-July, we're at Big Ten Media Days up in Indianapolis, probably won't get on a first or second team all Big Ten preseason list, who has a good chance to be there on the postseason list?
From the transfers or just the returning, anybody?
I'd say really anybody, yeah. It's just a guy that maybe is like, so he's not on the radar of like the national dudes, and he's like, hey, you know what, man, I could see it coming together.
Yeah. Quindarius Dunnigan, a transfer from Middle Tennessee, is really interesting to me. He made a couple plays in their spring scrimmage thing. I think he's got some inside-out versatility where you could see him rushing inside on passing down and then being a big end for him on first and second down. The guy has played a lot of football. Coming from Middle Tennessee, he's done some good things over there. Had at least one decent season. Has played a lot off the bench for him. He just looks he looks like a guy who could play at this level, and that's the main difference so far in what I'm seeing with now you're in year one, so the transfer numbers are bloated and big. But so far, what I'm seeing with this staff is like they're taking guys who have proven credentials on a football field. They're not taking guys who just look the part coming off the bus or who were 4 stars many, many moons ago, 3, 4, 5 years ago coming out of high school. They're getting guys with proven football credentials, even if it's at a lower level like a Middle Tennessee or whatever. They got a lineman coming in from Holy Cross who I think will be in the 2 deep. The last staff was caught up to me too much in measurables or pedigree, and that stuff, Kenneth Walker panned out. Couple guys panned out, but on the whole, you had a lot of misses too. When you could just say with this group, and maybe there'll be misses here too. I'm not saying there's any guarantees, but at least with like a guy like Quindarius Dunnigan, you could say, all right, he's played over 30 or 40 games or something in college football. He's got like 10 sacks to his name or whatever that might be, or maybe it might be under that, but he's got some things you can point to on the field. And as we talked about, D-line's an area that they need some help. And so I think he brings a little versatility. He showed a little bit in the spring game where he was hard to block. So I'll be curious about him.
What is the most kind of important, or what position battle are you watching the most come fall?
I'd say just the makeup of the offensive line. So they lost a 5th-year, 4-year starter at left guard, a center who was a 5th-year guy, Nick Samek, their only draft pick of the Ravens. He was basically a part-time starter, or full-time starter his whole time. Played a ton of football. That Spencer Brown, their right tackle, was a starter who transferred to Oklahoma, and then the right guard, Geno Vandermark, transferred to Alabama in the spring. So one returning guy up front, and the guys who were expected to compete to fill in behind him, we're talking about very few career starts. Some of them very few career snaps, Now there's some promise because Mel Tucker and Chris Kapilovic and his guys did increase the size in that room. That was something they wanted to do immediately. And over their 3 classes, they definitely did up the size. And now those, what's left of those guys are getting to those performance years as redshirt sophomores, juniors, that type of thing where you would expect them to push in. So there's absolutely a chance it could come together in a good way and be something solid because a lot of these guys were pretty good recruits. But we just haven't seen them, and I've never seen an offensive lineman play. If you couldn't even get, if you weren't getting backup snaps or whatever, just I'm nervous, I guess, about what could unfold there too, because I don't think it necessarily has to hit. And so that could be an issue for him. That's been a position of weakness for several years, really. The Kenneth Walker year, people will debate you and say like they were decent that year, and you could make arguments for both. But on the whole, this program hasn't consistently fielded a good offensive line since the Mark Antonio Heights, really. So that's always going to be an area I want to see. And like I said, with Childs, he can take you some places if you keep him healthy, if you give him a run game, if he can get that play action and that bootleg game working. That's a lot of ifs, though. So a lot of new faces up front, some transfers and some young guys trying to step in, and just how that all comes together and who's able to secure those spots is really the most intriguing position battle for me.
So I think they drew the toughest schedule in the Big Ten. You didn't dodge Ohio State, then you got to go play Oregon on short rest on a Friday night out west, and then you get Michigan as well and Iowa. And one of the non-conference games is early on at Boston College, and BC may not have a ton of talent, but they do have a ton of returning experience, and a team that's played together. Although they do have a new head coach, just as Michigan State does. If Childs just arrives a little bit earlier than I think you and I think he might, can this team make a bowl? Like, do they have that in him if he's going to play at, if he's like a first or second team All Big Ten QB?
Oh yeah. And he will really have, like I said, with his receiver talent. I think he's a lot of guys who you'd love to have as your number 3 and maybe a couple as your number 2. But right now it doesn't look like he has a true number 1. So if he were a second team All Big Ten QB at least, man, he probably really put on the cape. But yeah, he could. You look at this first 4: Florida Atlantic, Maryland, Prairie View A&M, and Boston College, as you mentioned. You think you can get 3 out of those probably, and then that middle section's a beast. But then you go down to November: Indiana, Illinois, Purdue, Rutgers in order. You think you can get a couple of those at least. So I do think it's manageable. But I just, like we said off top, where will you be health-wise by November? Where will you be between the ears by November after going through that gauntlet? Where's the confidence level? Where's the depth at key positions? You talk about, we mentioned the Kenneth Walker year. They lost 2 games in November because they just finally broke down. They stayed very healthy through September and October, went 8-0, beat Michigan, and then the very next week lost to Purdue. And because they had very little corner depth at that point, and they started breaking down elsewhere, got blasted by Ohio State, which is probably going to happen anyway. But, so where will they be by November? Go into Illinois, on a cold November night or something? Did something go wrong there? Absolutely. Will they even be better than Illinois? Maybe that's no given. So, but yeah, if Childs is going to be as good as we think, from day one, and can lift all boats, then absolutely a bowl game's in play. Even if he's just, okay, I think it's in play. But then you're talking about answering a whole bunch of other questions across the roster too.
Steven, really appreciate the time today, man. I know we'll all be checking out Spartan Tailgate for all the updates come fall camp and throughout the season. And that maybe a rough one, but you look at Jonathan Smith's track record like that. I love the hire for Michigan State. I'm excited to see what they do there.
Yeah, no, appreciate you having me, bud. As always, love this series, and that's what people see around here. They see some young Mark D'Antonio traits. Definitely not the same guy. He's definitely far from Mel Tucker though, and there's some DNA building here that I think people say that's familiar. I know what that is, and they're latching on, and so yeah, we'll see how it goes. Like I said, we're going to see if he can do what he's trying to do in this era.